Today my topic is on Afghanistan, the unbroken land in the world. In the heart of Asia lies a land carved by mountains and molded by empires, a land where civilizations rose and superpowers fell. For over a century, Afghanistan has stood at the crossroads of history, a place of breathtaking beauty and unbearable pain. The world called it the graveyard of empires, but to its people, it was simply home. From the kings of Kabul to the Cold War giants, from foreign invasions to fragile peace, every decade has left a scar and a story. This is the untold journey of Afghanistan. 1900 to 2025, a century of resilience, ruin, and rebirth. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world was racing toward modernity. Electric light, motor cars, empires at their height, and yet nestled between Persia, Russia, and British India, Afghanistan remained timeless, a land of proud tribes, silent deserts, and a king balancing tradition against the storms of change. Amir Abdur Rahman Khan, the Iron Emir, had forged a fragile unity through sheer will. His death in 1901 left a kingdom at peace on the surface, but restless beneath. His son, Habibullah Khan, inherited more than a throne. He inherited the impossible task of modernizing without surrendering sovereignty. Habibullah opened schools, sent students abroad, and invited ideas that frightened the old guard. The world was watching. The great game still echoed across these mountains as Britain and Russia eyed Afghanistan like chess players studying their final move. When the Great War consumed Europe, Afghanistan stood neutral. Habibullah resisted British pressure to join, but whispers of rebellion and independence grew in his court. In 1919, after his mysterious assassination, a young visionary prince rose, Amanullah Khan. Amanullah declared Afghanistan fully independent, defeating the British Empire in the Third Anglo to Afghan War. For the first time, this mountain kingdom had broken free of foreign chains. The year 1919 wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. Afghanistan would chart its own destiny. By 1929, Amanullah's modern kingdom crumbled. A rebel, Habibullah Kalakani, seized Kabul. For 9 chaotic months, Afghanistan spiraled. Then, out of the turmoil rose Mohammad Nadir Shah, restoring the monarchy in 1930. Nadir Shah promised balance, modernization at a gentler pace. He reopened schools, strengthened the army, and mended ties abroad. But his rule ended as it began, in blood. In 1933, an assassin's bullet ended his life, and a new era began under his son, Zahir Shah. The curtain closed on Afghanistan's first chapter of modern history. In 3 decades, kings had risen and fallen, ideals had clashed with faith, and the world's gaze never left this rugged land. Ahead lay decades of transformation and trials no one could foresee. The year is 1933. A young king, barely 19, ascends the Afghan throne, Zahir Shah. The world beyond his mountains stands at the edge of turmoil once again. Hitler rises in Europe, the Soviet Union tightens its grip to the north, and British India hums restlessly to the east. For 4 decades, this quiet monarch will rule a nation constantly balancing between old and new, faith and reform, east and west. Zahir Shah's Afghanistan became a land of cautious progress. Roads cut through mountains, foreign engineers arrived, and schools spread knowledge deeper into the valleys. Yet every step forward was shadowed by the memory of failed reforms. His father's death was a warning carved into history. Through the 1940s and 1950s, Afghanistan walked a delicate line. It joined neither bloc in the Cold War. Instead, it played the world's superpowers like a skilled chess master. American dollars built dams and universities. Soviet rubles built roads and factories. The two giants competed not with bullets, but with blueprints. This was the age of infrastructure, of hope. Kabul grew into a city of contrasts. Students reading Marx in smoky cafes while poets recited Rumi in candlelight. Western dresses appeared on its streets. Yet the call to prayer still echoed across the same ancient hills. In 1964, Zahir Shah introduced a new constitution, his boldest step yet. It granted women the right to vote, created a parliament, and promised democracy within a monarchy. The world applauded. Afghanistan seemed on the path to becoming a bridge between civilizations, but beneath the calm, tension brewed. Rural poverty persisted. Tribes felt unheard. In universities, young minds debated revolution. Some looked to Moscow, others to Mecca. By the late 1960s, ideological storms gathered. The monarchy's slow pace frustrated the educated youth. Meanwhile, whispers of republicanism echoed in the palace halls, led by none other than the king's cousin, Mohammad Daoud Khan. In July 1973, as Zahir Shah vacationed in Italy, Daoud struck. Tanks rolled through Kabul. The monarchy that had stood for over 2 centuries ended without a single shot fired in defense. Afghanistan was now a republic, and Daoud Khan, once the king's ally, now ruled as its first president. The world saluted a new beginning, a modern republic born from Afghan soil, not foreign design. But behind Daoud's determined gaze, a storm was already gathering. Ideologues from the People's Democratic Party, trained in Moscow and restless for revolution, saw their moment nearing. The Cold War winds that once brought aid and balance were shifting into tempests of ideology. Afghanistan's neutrality, once its greatest shield, was about to shatter. In 1973, Afghanistan's century of monarchy ended with quiet precision. Mohammad Daoud Khan promised progress, a republic born from Afghan hands, but within 5 years, that promise dissolved into fear, betrayal, and revolution. Daoud's republic was torn between worlds, rejecting Soviet control yet wary of the West. His independence frightened the men who had once helped him rise, members of the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, or PDPA. On a cold April night in 1978, their tanks roared through Kabul. In a storm of gunfire, Daoud and his family were killed. The Red Star rose above the presidential palace. The Saur Revolution had begun. Afghanistan was now a socialist state, bound to Moscow by ideology and arms. The new leaders promised land reform, literacy, and equality. But their revolution came with terror. Thousands were imprisoned. Tradition was declared backward. Religion was seen as resistance. From the villages of Khost to the valleys of Panjshir, the people rose, not for politics, but for faith, for dignity, for home. The uprising spread faster than the new government could contain. The Kremlin watched, anxious, then alarmed. In December 1979, the world changed overnight. The Soviet army, more than 100,000 troops, crossed the Amu Darya River. Helicopters thundered over Kabul. President Hafizullah Amin was assassinated in his palace, and a new Soviet-backed ruler, Babrak Kemal, was installed. Afghanistan became the latest battlefield of the Cold War for the next decade. A nation of poets and farmers became a land of war. The Mujahideen, born from the mountains, fought with everything they had: ancient rifles, unbreakable faith, and foreign weapons. The United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and others funneled billions in arms and training. To Washington, it was a chess move. To Afghans, it was survival. The cost was unimaginable. Villages vanished. Millions fled to Pakistan and Iran. A generation grew up in camps, their lullabies replaced by the sound of warplanes. And yet, the spirit of resistance burned bright. From the deserts of Helmand to the caves of Tora Bora. By the late 1980s, even the Soviets grew weary. Their soldiers, young and broken, questioned why they fought a people who would never surrender. The world called it Russia's Vietnam, but for Afghans, it was another chapter in a long, unending struggle for self-determination. In 1988, the Soviet Union signed the Geneva Accords. A year later, tanks rolled back across the border, leaving behind a fractured land and 1 million ghosts. The war had ended, but peace did not come. Afghanistan stood free, but divided, armed, and haunted for a decade. The world had watched Afghanistan through the lens of geopolitics, superpowers playing their deadly game. But for Afghans, it was never about ideology. It was about surviving the fire. In February 1989, the last Soviet tank crossed the Friendship Bridge, leaving behind a land battered, proud, and armed to the teeth. The Cold War powers called it victory. But for Afghanistan, the war had just entered a darker chapter. The Mujahideen, once united by faith and resistance, now stood divided by ideology and ambition. Warlords carved the nation into fragments. Kabul became a battlefield shelled by those who once fought side by side. In the 1990s, the world turned away. The headlines faded, the funds dried up, the people who had defeated an empire were left to fight each other. By 1992, the Soviet-backed government collapsed. The Mujahideen took Kabul. But peace lasted only days. Old alliances shattered and new ones bled into the streets. Afghanistan descended into a brutal civil war. Out of this wreckage rose a new force, young, disciplined, and born from the refugee camps of Pakistan. They called themselves the Taliban, students of Islam, promising order after years of anarchy. In 1996, the Taliban swept through Kabul. They disarmed warlords, restored a harsh stability, but at a devastating cost. Music was banned. Women vanished from schools. Freedom disappeared beneath the veil of fear. The world watched in discomfort, uncertain whether to condemn or engage. Meanwhile, a shadow was growing within Afghanistan's mountains. A wealthy exile from Saudi Arabia named Osama bin Laden. Welcomed by the Taliban, bin Laden built a network that would soon turn the world's gaze back to Afghanistan in fire and dust. As the 1990s closed, al-Qaeda's attacks shook embassies in Africa, the USS Cole, and then the unimaginable, September 11th, 2001. The towers fell in New York City. The world stopped. In the weeks that followed, the United States declared its longest war. The Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden. And once again, Afghanistan, tired, wounded, divided, became the center of global vengeance. In October 2001, the bombs began to fall. The Taliban regime crumbled within weeks. The world promised a new beginning, democracy, development, peace. But for the Afghan people, history's wheel had turned once more, and the cycle of foreign armies had begun again. From empire to republic, from jihad to invasion, Afghanistan had survived every storm. Yet every victory left a deeper wound. October 2001. Within weeks of the September 11 attacks, American jets roar across Afghan skies. A new war begins, this time not for empire or ideology, but for vengeance and security. Taliban crumble. Al-Qaeda retreats into caves. Kabul falls. And the world hails a new dawn for a battered nation. Hamid Karzai is sworn in beneath the NATO flag. Promises of democracy echo through the ruins. Billions pour in. Girls return to classrooms. Roads are paved. Elections held. For a fleeting moment, hope takes root. Afghan women rise to news desks, courts, and classrooms. But beneath the optimism, another war is quietly beginning. The war of hearts and minds. Foreign soldiers cannot see what lies behind every door. Civilian deaths, corruption, and broken promises erode faith. The Taliban, scattered but unbroken, wait in silence, rebuilding from the shadows of Pakistan's borderlands. Years turn to decades. Presidents change in Washington. Generations of Afghan children grow up knowing only checkpoints and explosions. The West speaks of freedom. Afghans speak of exhaustion. By 2014, NATO combat troops withdraw, leaving behind a fragile army and a fragile peace. Corruption deepens. ISIS emerges. In the villages, the Taliban return, not as strangers, but as ghosts of familiarity promising order where government offered only paper. In 2020, a deal is signed. The United States agrees to leave. Hope and fear twist together once more. As foreign troops pack their bases, the Taliban move swiftly, taking province after province almost without a fight. August 15th, 2021. The world watches in disbelief. The Afghan government collapses, the president flees. Taliban fighters enter the presidential palace, and 20 years of war end in a single afternoon. Evacuation, panic, tears. Mothers lifting babies over barbed wire, men clinging to aircraft wings. The longest war in American history closes not with victory, but with silence. 2 decades. Trillions spent, thousands dead. And yet, Afghanistan stands where it began, independent, proud, and scarred. For every empire that entered, one truth remained: you can occupy the land, but never the soul of its people. The year is 2021. The last foreign soldiers have left. The flags have changed once more. White replacing tricolor, silence replacing speeches. After 20 years of war, Afghanistan stands alone again. To some, it feels like an ending. To others, a long-delayed beginning. But to the people, it is simply another turn of history's wheel. The Taliban return with promises of security and religious governance. Yet the world watches cautiously. Embassies closed, funds frozen, hope uncertain. Women who once led classrooms and courts now watch from behind closed doors. Journalists vanish. Voices fall silent, but silence in Afghanistan has never meant surrender. In the alleys of Kabul and the mountains of Bamiyan, courage breathes quietly. A teacher who still gathers her students in secret. An artist who paints freedom in the shadows. The economy collapses. Drought deepens. Aid dwindles. Yet the spirit of survival, that ancient Afghan instinct, endures. Traders reopen their markets. Farmers till dry soil with bare hands. Life, fragile but unyielding, goes on. From 2021 to 2025, the world debates recognition, sanctions, and reform. The superpowers that once fought for this land now watch from afar, unsure how to engage. But history whispers a familiar truth. Afghanistan cannot be ruled from outside, only respected from afar. Through centuries of empire and exile, reform and ruin, one thread remains unbroken: the will of its people. Afghanistan is not defined by war, but by endurance, not by occupation, but by identity. Its mountains have seen every invader come and go, yet still they stand, unmoved, eternal. To the world, Afghanistan is a lesson. To its people, it is a heartbeat that refuses to stop. And so, the story continues: a land unbroken, a people unyielding, a future unwritten. This is Afghanistan. A century has passed. Kings and generals, invaders and liberators, all have written their names into Afghanistan's soil. But the mountains remember only one truth: that every empire leaves and the Afghan spirit remains. From the royal courts of Kabul to the refugee camps of Peshawar, from Soviet tanks to American drones, this land has carried the weight of history, and yet it still finds ways to sing. To understand Afghanistan is to understand resilience itself. It is a story written not in victories or defeats, but in endurance, the quiet courage to rebuild again and again. Perhaps one day the world will stop defining Afghanistan by its wars and begin to see it for what it truly is: a land of poets and mountains, of memory and faith, of loss, yes, but also of limitless hope. This is not an ending. This is a beginning. The story of a people who refuse to disappear. For every fallen wall, there rises a dream. For every war, a new generation is born, ready to try again, and that is the power of Afghanistan.